All right, then. Welcome, folks, to a new episode of Beyond Quality, the first episode in 2026 and the sixth episode, if I know how to count at all. Um, it This episode we have the usual suspects, Vitaly, Maryia, and myself, Anupam, on the call, and we have our very special guest, Mike Jared, as a return guest on this call because we just couldn't get enough of him. So, welcome to the episode, Mike.
Thank you. It's good to be back. And yeah, thank you for inviting me once more. I do appreciate it.
And today we'll be talking about economics of testing. This is a research activity that Whitley has been pursuing on our community, where he's done some phenomenal work on quantifying risk and making it more palatable in economic terms, right? So this is such an important part of our work as quality engineering professionals because it gives us the vocabulary of taking risks and taking quality, which is very intangible and a little bit, it's a little hard to express value in this field, but he's exactly tackling this problem because a lot of times quality and risk gets neglected precisely because of that. And when we translate this into economic terms, we have a much better basis to speak with managers and get decisions that are in interest of quality, right? So, Vitaly, could you tell us a little bit about how this research started and what its motivation was?
Thank you so much, Anupam. Yeah, the background story for this is quite long. I've been in IT for many years, 24 now, and I've been a QA engineer, a developer, a manager myself. And I've seen countless cases in the companies I worked for and other companies where bad quality was piling up, where things were going south all the time, where releases were slower and slower, where there were more and more incidents on production, where more and more risks were actually happening. And I am a true believer in the fact that in the idea that people have good intentions generally. So I was like thinking and reflecting upon this whole thing. Why are we seeing this enshittification of products, where we struggle, we even struggle to use some products, or we struggle to maintain them and test them? And I don't think that managers are bad. I was a manager. I didn't think of myself as a bad manager, but I had to make bad decisions, or I thought I had to make them. Developers aren't bad as well. They have good intentions. Testers have good intentions always. So I was like, how come that we have these bad tendencies in so many companies and products, while every single person in the company originally has good intentions? And I thought that this was similar to the Babel's Tower myth, where we seem to be speaking the same mouth, the same language technically, and yet misunderstanding ourselves. And of course, what you've said is right, that there is a problem with even reasoning about risks. Because if risk doesn't occur, if something bad doesn't happen, but we have invested money into reducing this risk, it's like we wasted the money, right? I mean, there is zero tangibility to risks not happening. And this, I think, creates this strange paradox, a strange incentivization that managers want to deliver faster. Of course they want. We have to deliver something faster to the clients to get them happier and to get them to spend money on our product. And then managers have this inclination towards cutting testing or cutting quality assurance practices and investments, simply because from one side, if you invest, you have zero tangibility of what's happening, unless your product dies, like Titan Submersible. And on the other hand, you have some folks who are saying, we need to test more, I don't want to release this bad stuff. So I thought maybe we should find a way to communicate better with each other, managers, testers, and developers. I tried to think of a technical way, of a technical vocabulary, but I rarely see managers having enough time and honestly expertise to dive into every single bit of technicality. So it's just simply not realistic to expect managers to dive into all the technical nuances of a product and of its testing. And I think that we as testers can make the first step. we as testers can learn a bit of a new vocabulary. And it's not just an additional work. It's also, I would say, a good way to improve your motivation at work. Because I see countless testers being treated as cogs in the machine. They are just told, test this, test that, test this, test that, write out a test, do this, do that. And it's boring and it's demotivating when you're just being treated as a robot, like really like a robot. I think that we as testers want to take pride in what we're doing. I want to say to my mom, we released this, my product manager or the developers, but we released this good thing, and this good thing is actually helping real people. So I believe that we as testers can find a way, can start learning this economical vocabulary so that we find a way to talk to managers and developers in the same language. And yes, it's hard. And that is why I had to come up with a research, and it's going to be an evergreen research. I think it will improve and improve over time. I want to make a video course, a free video course out of it for everyone to get to just start with it. And I want people to feel happier at their work. I want people to feel testers, to feel treated better, to be treated better at work. Because if they have a good discussion, a meaningful discussion with good results with managers and developers, they will feel motivated more.
Yeah, and it's not very easy as well to translate these technical realities into economic terms. But what I see in your research is that you've addressed a lot of the pitfalls as well as the difficulties with doing this. But anyway, Mike and Maria, how's your experience been with this topic of economics of testing? Maybe Mike, you could go first.
Yeah, thank you, Anupam. I'd love to. So, um, first of all, I concur. I agree with what Vitaly has been describing there. In every instance, I said this last time I was on the podcast. I've had a good 35-year career so far in software testing, quality engineering, and quality assurance, and we haven't fixed the problem in 35 years about the value of testing being genuinely understood throughout organizations that we work in. I haven't written a research paper, but I'm doing a very similar piece of thinking about at the moment about how to describe the value of the work that we do to budget holders so they're more inclined to buy testing services. So I work for a company called 2i. We are a software testing consultancy. I'm a senior consultant. Part of my job is to really describe to board level folks the value that they get from buying services from us. And I'm incredibly aware that part of the problem is that we grow up as being testers. And so we learn to talk about testing in very logistical terms. We like to talk about requirements coverage. We like to talk about test automation. We love to talk about the numbers of tests we've got, how many bugs we're finding, defect closure rates, release criteria, all those good things that are very much outputs of testing, but are not the outcomes that businesses need. And we need to shift our language away from outputs, which don't have a lot of value and people don't understand. It goes back to what Vitaly was saying about our stakeholders not really understanding the language of testing. And we need to describe what we do in terms of outcomes, outputs, which moves it away from being a cost conversation to a value conversation. So I'm also doing a piece of work which is very much in line with what Vitaly's thinking here, is about understanding what the main risks are that organizations carry, identifying who the accountable stakeholders are for the mitigation of those risks, then identifying the secondary stakeholders who've got the responsibility for making sure those risks don't turn into issues, and then working out what it is that testing and quality engineering and quality assurance can do to mitigate those risks. So that when I have conversations with senior people at board level, I can talk to them about the cost of delay. I can talk to them about cyber risk. I can talk to them about capacity or capability challenges that they have operation. And I can describe how the work that we can do for them actually mitigates their risk and makes their lives easier. And that isn't just an economic conversation, it's also an empathic conversation. What you're doing is you're talking to a human being about the pain the challenge, the anxiety that they carry in their professional life, and how you can remove that for them. And when you have that sort of conversation, it's incredibly powerful. It's quite changing in terms of the respect and the dynamics that happen in the room when you then start to talk about testing. But we've got to speak with a different language. So we need to talk the language of risk. We need to talk the language of mitigation. We need to talk the language of economics. And the other thing I'm just going to throw out, and we can discuss it, is that in terms of demonstrating the value, we do need to be better at speaking the language of money. We need to think like engineers, but behave like managers. So we need to think about how testing can improve the effectiveness of an organization. We need to think how testing can actually improve the efficiency of an organization and how it also improves productivity. And when we can start to talk about those things and we can measure them, we're in a brilliant position to calculate ROI. And if we can calculate and demonstrate the return on investment of quality activities in an organization, it takes the conversation of cost away because we're showing the benefit in financial terms. And that's kind of where we need to get to. So I'll stop there and hand across to Maryia.
Yeah, sure. I totally agree that we need to find this common language that everyone understands. And it not only will give us the opportunity to speak the same language as our leaders do, but it also allows us to find allies in ops and UX team, in product team, because that's the language that everyone understands, right? Because everyone cares about the money. Because if the company runs out of the money, then we are out on the job market, right? So we need to kind of try to understand and learn this new terminology, or maybe not new, but common terminology that everyone speaks and understands, to leverage the best possible outcomes in our products. And also, it helps us, if we learn this language, then it helps us also to reframe testing as decision support, like to make this a base for bigger project decisions and company decisions. And then we suddenly become not just testers, as many would like to say, but we become advisors for our leaders and the whole company. So I think that's a crucial moment for testers, and a great opportunity to learn how to reframe our role and be seen as a important part in the organization, and not just a provider of metrics or bug gatekeeper, whatever. We as testers, we need to learn this language to be seen as someone who understands business, who understands the pain of your current company, and that we know how to show the value to our customers.
I love that. Sorry, I won't take long, but I would, before I retire, I'd like to see people who work in testing and quality engineering, when they get asked what they do for a job, if their response was, I help organizations by mitigating their business risks so it enables their growth. That is a much better elevator pitch than saying, I test software.
Yeah, I mean, I think when it comes to value delivery, I work predominantly in the test automation domain. And I used to express myself as someone who helps you automate tests better, but that's not framed in value terms. And I feel like a better value-based definition would be, I help you deliver software faster with a higher degree of security, right? Which is very much linked to what you said about risk mitigation, right? And I just wanted to share like a very quick anecdote of my own experience with economics of testing. So I was in a previous role serving a client, and we had a problem at the client side, which was causing our tests to fail unexpectedly, and we needed them to address this issue just so that our tests run more smoothly. And we kept speaking about this. We kept speaking about this problem that we have and this pain that we have for weeks at end, and nothing was really forthcoming from the other side. But then I went into this meeting and we measured the amount of time it took for us to, to fix the tests with no value add. And I put a number on the amount of time. I mean, I could easily translate that time into money for the client because we are billing on time and material. And the moment they saw the euros on the slide, the next day the problem got fixed. Right. So like you said. I mean, I think I finally found the language that the other team wanted to hear in this Tower of Babel problem. But another very interesting aspect which you brought up, Mike, is the one that relates to emotion and empathy. I think regardless of how rational we are with our reasoning, when it comes to having this conversation, we need around risks. We need to be a little mindful of how risks and fears can have the opposite effect of what we are trying to achieve here. Mainly because nobody wants to. I mean, like those are things that we tend to push under the carpet, right? So I think it requires that emotion and empathy to be able to elegantly put this topic across. And I think, Vitaly, we also discussed about how this is where you also want to, this is one aspect that you also want to cover in your artifact and your research.
Yeah, thank you so much. I completely agree with what you're saying and Mike is saying and Maria is saying, that I would even frame it as such. There is rationality and there is politics. And even though the politics is an overloaded word with some negative connotations, it's still, in my mind, describes well that you have to, it's not power, you have to gain authority in the company, you have to gain trust, you have to gain some social capital within the company to be able to force even certain decisions. By force, I mean that people will listen to your rational arguments and try to understand your rational arguments. Because I've seen countless times, like at least 20 times, when I proposed a completely, fully rational justification for certain changes, and they were rejected due to many various reasons. Some people were afraid that those changes would endanger their status quo. Some people were fearing that those changes would reduce the headcount that they own, and therefore they would be perceived as a worse manager. Because, oh wow, you're losing headcount, you're losing your ground, right? There is politics, unfortunately, in pretty much all the companies. And I would say that, yes, we need to learn the vocabulary. We need to understand how to translate risks and fears into an investment discussion where money is on the spreadsheet. But then again, in many companies, unless you're a top tier consultant like Mike, who is invited and who has already got a huge power because he's a great consultant, unless you're that, or if you're just a tester, chances are that you will have to make little steps, small steps. Maybe reduce what Anupam was saying, reduce just the direct costs. Suggest that since we are not wasting, but spending too many man hours on doing something which could have been improved, let's invest a little bit into this improvement. Let's cut those direct costs. And if you show a proven history of success of reducing direct costs while improving quality, you can then start a bigger discussion. Start a discussion about, let's say, compliance risks, which could literally kill the business, right? I mean, if you're losing some compliance certification, you can be just gone out of the market straight away. But even those risks are not almost managed in so many companies. I'm surprised to see that. So many companies are fined for GDPR. So many companies are fined for this and that. So my advice to testers would be, first, of course, learn the basic economic vocabulary. Understand how fears can be converted to risks, how to gain allies and friends from CS, marketing, sales, whoever, by helping them reduce their costs and reduce their risks. And then start bigger discussions. Start discussions on the consultant level now. Ask CS, what stops you from selling cheaper and faster? Can we improve something? Maybe people do not agree to buy our product because they had bad experience with our quality. Maybe we can find some details there. Or ask CS folks, maybe they see a good deal of churn happening because some bugs are not fixed. Or ask products or marketing. Maybe we can be marketing our product much better and much cheaper if we added certain things or removed certain things or improved quality in certain things. So gaining allies then it allows you to have bigger discussions on the consultant level. And this in turn will improve your motivation. And this in turn will improve your feeling of what you're achieving in this company. I've yet to see a single engineer who wouldn't love to build a better product.
Mhm. And when it comes to having these conversations with empathy and emotion, Mike, like how do you proceed with that? Like that aspect that you brought in, how do you tread the fine balance between speaking economics and speaking with emotion and empathy?
Okay, so it's a good one. Thanks for asking it. It. A lot of this goes back to some very fundamental things that we need to do as human beings in our organizations. And the first one is rather boring, but it's essential, and it's called stakeholder mapping. We need to really get ourselves into a position where we're very good at knowing who the stakeholders of our services are. And that goes back to understanding a number of things. We need to go back to understand what the business strategy is and what the IT strategy is that enables the business to grow, and who are the owners of elements of that strategic piece of work. Then we know what that looks like. We can work out who we need to be talking to. The other thing is about the risks, and we're going to talk about risks a lot, I know, because this is fundamentally what we're looking at here. We need to know who the risk owners are for technology risks. We need to understand who the owners are for financial risks. We need to do the same for operational risks and for reputational risks. And if it's a regulated environment, going back to compliance, what Vitaly was saying, regulatory risks. And within those risk areas, those like 5 categories, there are enormous numbers of sub-risks that all have an aggregating effect if they turn into issues. So if I just take one, for example, a financial risk, which is cost of delay, you might have a risk around the opportunity cost of capital. No, we're going to speak some economic language here. The economic cost of capital, the competitive disadvantage, revenue leakage. From Maryia, there's also things like customer trust erosion, strategic misalignment, where we're not delivering the right things for the right reasons for the market, increased delivery risk, and also demoralized teams. So all of these sub-risks have got different owners. Sometimes in terms of accountable ownership, they'll be with the CFO because they're financial. Sometimes they might be with the CTO because they are more about the technology side of the speed of delivery and the cost of delay. And sometimes they might be with the CEO if they're operational. So we've got to do that stakeholder mapping against the risk profile. And the way we do that, if we can, is by getting hold of the risk register. Now, often these things are locked away and they're quite difficult to access. But if through your management line structure, you can talk about wanting to improve the company outcomes and do a piece of work, can I have access to not all the mitigation activities, but the risks that the business are carrying and who the accountable owners are in terms of the executive level and who the responsible owners are from a tactical place, we can start to put those into the stakeholder map as well. And so when we think about strategic outcomes, we think about business risks, we can start to do that stakeholder mapping. Now, at the moment, this is just at the organizational level. This isn't looking at the products or the platforms. This is just the business. And we can do that stakeholder mapping. And then the art of creating empathy and talking to them is literally having conversations. There's no easy way. We've got to be able to get in a room with them or have a coffee with them or go out for dinner or whatever and start to talk to them about what sort of risks they're carrying, what outcomes they're on the hook for delivery. And do you know, we might then help with that. I've got an example of what we did in this piece of work where, Anupam, we used test automation. We were able to cut out the manual regression testing, put it in the CI/CD pipeline. We could ship more features in 2 weeks by 50% by using test automation. So it improved our efficiency, it lowered the cost, and it improved our productivity. We could do more work with the same number of people by using automation. That's an economical conversation that would delight a CFO or a CTO. And by being able to use examples of where those good practice events have happened and say, we could do this for you, starts to actually make them feel, actually, there's somebody here who's got a track record. I can trust them because I've got this advocacy in the company of somebody I can talk to, who will actually say it's true, this happened. And you can start to then talk to them and, at a human level and say, it must be really tough. You're on the hook for talk to a CTO, right? You're on the hook for making technology a business enabler. But actually what you're doing, you're worrying all the time because we're not shipping fast enough. Let me help you. That must be difficult. And by having those conversations, it shows that you're not really trying to sell them testing. You're just trying to help them out as a human. And that empathy is wonderful because that's where you start to build trust. You build trust through the demonstration of value, through case studies and examples of what you've done before, and by talking to them as a human being, not just as a technology person. Does that help?
Mm-hmm. That is definitely helpful. So, just to summarize, it is to get an understanding of the risks per se and which stakeholders are directly responsible or indirectly responsible for certain risks, and having honest person-to-person conversations with the people involved, and that's how you get buy-in, right? But when it comes to now, let's assume that we've had these conversations and we have the right people in the room. Now, Whitley, I wanted to ask you about how, right? Like we've spoken about the why, and I think that's fairly clear as of now. And how do you take these risks and actually translate them into economic terms, into terms that are more palatable, tangible, and actionable for the people who are in the room? So how are you going to actually break these things down?
Thanks. That's pretty much what Mike was saying. By building a risk register, I have more experience with companies where risk register was not even there. So it was all in the heads of certain people. And when you have things in the heads, it's pretty much always very irrational. Like a CFO might be looking more on the direct costs and might be not even considering compliance risks, which to me was always like a surprise. How are you not considering something which could stop your business like right now? Maybe it was not for the CFO to be doing. Maybe CEO should be doing that. But anyway, I've seen in my experience cases where risk register was not present. So in my experience, what helped is what your Mike is saying: gather people together, ask them for their fears. It's not even gonna be economical reasoning behind everything. I've seen CTOs not even thinking about cost of delay. I've seen product managers not even trying to quantify cost of delay. So they just come with a feature idea and say, we need ASAP. ASAP. What is ASAP? How can you compare two features, ASAPs of two features? Anyway, so I try to gather people and ask them for their fears. If it's possible to do in a brainstorm, if the atmosphere and the environment of the company is blameless, because I've seen people who are like snakes in the same jar if you gather them together. So in that case, you have to talk to them personally. Exactly what your Mike is saying. How can I, Vitaly, find a way to reduce your fears, to reduce your workload, to make you happier at work, to improve your financial well-being as well at work, to help you achieve your OKRs and your goals. Maybe your OKR for dear CTO is to reduce time to market twice. Can I help you here? What are the risks that we're seeing here? So I come with a fears register first. Then I try to map those fears. I just invite people to the discussion. Am I understanding you right, dear John, that this fear can be expressed as this risk? And as you might say, there are so many risks we can think about. We can try to map fears into risks. It's not going to be ideal. For sure, it's not going to be ideal. But that's the first step to help people rationalize their fears, to make them rational, make them closer to the economics. And then we can have a group discussion, again, if the atmosphere allows, to prioritize the risks and to quantify them economically. Maybe compliance is not the top risk for us. Maybe being on the market first or not being on the market first is the top risk for us now. I don't know. It's for the company to decide. It's not my company. I can't make them, right. I can't force them to make this decision. So then when we do this exercise of the first attempt of quantifying the risks. What will happen to the company and to our product and to all the various factors of product delivery and support and maintenance if this risk occurs? And we can then have a very simple spreadsheet table with priorities for risks, with a risk register with the priorities. And we can then reason what we need to do to reduce each risk. And since we have a prioritized risks register, it's quite easy now to see that, yes, dear CS, you're overloaded with work, but we all agree. You agreed that your risk is lower than someone else's risks. And if the atmosphere is bad, well, unfortunately, CEO will have to decide on the prioritization.
Right. But I think what you're saying about taking risk that is intangible and only in people's head and making it a tangible formulation. I mean, actually starting with fears that are living in people's heads, translating fears into risks, mapping those risks into different categories, and then having conversations about this, right? That is how you go from fears to having a risk register. And, once you have a risk register, you are in a far better place to take action, right? Like Mike and Maryia, what is your experience with having these sort of conversations and carrying this activity out?
Yeah, sure. And what Vitaly just raised is a good point, because we, as testers, we used to think like quite technically, in technical terms.
Yes.
Whatever works, that works, kind of. But this research that Vitaly is doing is about giving us a seat at the wider table. It's helping us to take into consideration wider and to think wider in terms of quality. What does quality means, and what risks we could raise, not only in technical terms but in legal and so on, brand management and so on and so on. So I think that testing fails most when testing teams and testing leaders, when they don't have a voice at the table. And this framework that Vitaly suggests, it helps kind of to start the conversation and to have this wider perspective on quality. So I think every team that wants to have an eye on the wider perspective on quality needs to really have a look at this research and apply risk assessment checklist and terminology, and turn risks into the language of money.
Cool. Good. I like it. And for me, the good thing about this conversation, right, is that we're talking about elevating our credibility and our value in an organization. And whether you lead with fears or whether you lead with risk, the fact that somebody from a quality function is talking in the organization about business risk and bringing people together to discuss what they may look like and what can be done about it elevates our power, it elevates our reputation and our credibility immediately. It really does. And that is a very, very good place to be when you consider that normally we are brought in at the last minute to de-risk a problem that somebody's forgotten about. So it shows proactivity, it shows business awareness, it shows financial acumen, but we need to be credible to do that. So we need to be prepared. So when I talk to customers or clients or prospects, whatever, in my toolbox as a consultant, I have my list of risks. I have my list of strategic priorities that most organizations are looking to achieve through digital transformation. I have a list of the common challenges that organizations are facing, and I know what they look like. So if I've got an opportunity to talk to customers, I don't talk to them about testing at all. I sit down, maybe have a workshop with them, try and bring in the right kind of people that I think would be interested in discussing risk or challenges or outcomes, and say, I don't know anything about your business, but can we just talk about technology risks? I'm going to put a list up on the wall. Can you dot vote whether you think you're carrying these risks? Here's a definition of what they mean. Okay, we've done that. Now let's have a look at the financial risks. Are you carrying cost of delay? Are you trying to reduce cost in your business? Because that could have a big impact on your operational expenditure in IT delivery. But we could still help you achieve cost reduction. But what are you trying to do there? You know, the reputational stuff is obviously our key area. If the quality of software is poor, that's going to erode revenue, it's going to erode customer trust, it's going to have an organizational impact. And having that list of things to talk about gets people discussing. But we need to be on the front foot sometimes, like Vitaly said. Not every organization has got a risk register, or even if they do, it may be incomplete. And we may not get access to it anyway. So we need to have the knowledge and the ability to actually drive that conversation and hold the workshop in the first instance. So that's what we need to do, is know what those risks are, have a definition of them, understand the ones that we're most likely to be carrying in the context of the business. And importantly, Vitaly said it, it's about the stage of growth. As an organization goes from startup to medium-sized to corporate, the risk profile changes enormously, as does the risk ownership in an organization too. So in a startup, you might have a founder and a CIA, and all of the risks are with those two people. But as it grows and scales, and you suddenly get to their organization where they're bringing in 100 million euros a year in terms of revenue, there may be 15 people on the board, and all of that risk gets distributed across the different functions that are represented. And we need to build relationships with those people and stay in touch with them. So as an organization does grow, if you're working on a company that's growing, you've got to identify who's coming in, what's a new role that's being created, how can I help that person in that role? But it's on us to own the conversation, and we can only do it with credibility if we actually speak the language and we know the language of business. So that's where I'll leave that one for now.
But Mike, when I listen to you speak, right, like, and if I didn't know your background, I would have definitely guessed you are, you're a seasoned finance professional with a lot of C-suite experience, right? Like, because that's how your framing and your vocabulary comes across, and I think that's very intentional and also really, it really brings you forward in these conversations. But like you said, you need to have preparation in place, and you need to have the right toolkit and the understanding. And this is where I urge people to actually check out Vitaly's research firsthand, because it's impossible for us in this sort of a conversation to go into the level of detail and thoroughness that he has put in terms of enabling you with that toolkit, right? Like, and that is a gap that most of us as quality professionals have. And the amount of rigor and detail that has gone into closing this gap in this research is phenomenal. I was blown away when I read it the first time. And that's why I urge all of you who are listening right now to make a mental note for checking this out as soon as you're in front of a system. It's just a link and a couple of clicks away. We'll include all the links here. But, it really breaks down concretely about how you can go from fears to risks, to categorize risks, to prioritize risks, to risks that ultimately have a number behind them, and a financial number, right? And I'm not going to speak in, I mean, I'm going to shift the conversation now to, in the last few minutes, to the challenges we encounter, right? Like the pitfalls that we are likely to encounter when it comes to risk assessment and, quantifying risks. So maybe, Vitaly, what are some of the challenges that you've experienced, and, how do people mitigate these?
Thank you. And thank you for your kind words. I do appreciate. The hardest challenges for me were always the social challenges. Um, uh, in my opinion, getting to understand the risks, the rational discussion, to have a rational discussion around risks, cannot happen if I don't, as a consultant or an internal consultant, understand the incentivization for each stakeholder as well. Because even if the stakeholder says, I am interested in automating, let's say we have the discussion, we agree that automation is good for this particular person, for this particular department. But if this person is afraid to lose headcount because someone else will see that these people are less busy now, chances are the change will be harder to make. I had issues like that, where people on the meetings were saying, yes, I'm totally for this change. It's super cool. It's going to reduce this, reduce that. It will be amazing. And then they were sabotaging this change because it was my fault as the change manager that I misunderstood their incentivization, their motivation behind it. This is why I second so much what Mike was saying about empathy, about true empathy, about getting better understanding of the stakeholders you're going to be dealing with. And I, as an engineer before and a manager, now a developer advocate, I know that it is much easier for me to talk to you, Anupam, you, Maria, you, Mike, in just technical details. Just discuss this beautiful technical engineering world. But I want to come back to what Mike was saying in the start of the discussion, that engineers rarely think about money, but I think that true engineers should think about money because money and the budgets are our first constraint. An engineer would not build a bridge out of his favorite materials just because he likes the materials. He would build a bridge knowing the constraints, knowing the projected type of load on the bridge, knowing the geological situation under the bridge, etc., etc. And this person would actually build the bridge, which would last for the projected time in the project, right? For the estimated time in the project. And I think we should strive to become like these engineers, to understand how our changes will affect people, how much our changes cost, how much our changes will save. And the social part is extremely important. What Mike was saying about getting an empathetic understanding of people is important. I failed at that. I failed many times. I failed to fully understand the people. I was like, okay, we got this site, let's go, I'll run, I'll do it all. If the person is hiding his disagreement or her disagreement with my change proposal, it will not work.
Mike and Maria, what are some of the challenges you faced?
One of the biggest challenges I faced in my career was communication, right? Reframing testing as decision support, showing not only numbers, but reframing numbers into stories to, as you said, involve emotions, to get people to understand what you want to say, not only showing raw data, but also reframing it into a story that everyone is willing to set into and kind of understand, because it's quite important that everyone is on the same board and that everyone gets what you want to say.
Mike?
Right. So, the biggest challenge that I think, well, that I know I've faced, and probably it's not unique, is getting into a position where you're credible to have the conversation in the first place. So if you're an engineer and you've moved up from being a technical engineer into a lead and then a managerial role, as a manager, you start to think a bit more about the business. You start to think more about the economics and finances that are going on around you in your team. But you're still internally viewed as a test manager, and you're somebody who does test development to a platform. And even if you then move into a role where you become the kind of equivalent of a head of test or a capability lead or something of that ilk, you're still seen as a person who is doing testing on software, okay, or your team is. And so to suddenly turn up and say, hey, I want to talk about business risk, people are just going to say, well, why? Why should I listen to you? What do you bring to the table that's even going to be remotely interesting to me as a board member or a senior leadership team member? So one of the hardest things is building that internal credibility to then even have the conversation, right? And I don't have all the answers to that, by the way. I know it's a challenge, but it goes back to some of the things that Anupam was saying about having some case studies that start to provide examples that you can use in your storytelling. Say, I've done this before. This is the outcome that we achieved. These are some of the things that you didn't know that we were able to help support by getting products to market more quickly. In your reporting and day-to-day conversations, you start to seed the language. It's almost doing it by stealth. You can't do it in a big bang unless you've got a great CEO, Vitaly, who says, this guy's brilliant. I want him to actually drive change in the organization. If you've got that remit and the power that goes with it and the influence, then you're in a great position. But we're not going to get that overnight, logically and realistically. So it's about changing the way we speak. It's about changing the way you behave. It's about changing the way we report and getting that in our teams. So we start to change our team's identity and their mentality at the ground level, and we work bottom up to get to that point where people are listening to us and talking to us in a different way. And then we can pitch. So it's not a straightforward overnight change, I don't think, and it is a challenge, but it's something we need to address from the bottom up.
Definitely. And it's interesting how all the three challenges we've just spoken about are very interrelated. They are conversations around credibility, around trust, around having a seat at the table, around being part of the decision making. But I'm going to actually shift the conversation a little bit with the risk that I have, and you will soon wrap up after that. Let's say I have those things and I have the right people in the room. One challenge that I've often frequently encountered is when they are speaking about fears, a lot of the fears are not concrete enough. And once those fears are outlined, the ownership is not established well enough. But, one point that I took away from Vitaly's research and that I'm really eager to try out the next time is in trying to categorize some of these fears I think it's using the 3-point system, Vitaly. Can you tell us a little more about this technique, about how you can use this technique to make risks that are not specific enough a little more tangible?
There are multiple ways and multiple approaches you can take from risk management to categorizing and prioritizing risk. In medicine, for instance, there is a clear triage system. It's this model of categorizing risks works for them. Of course, you can read the research, but I would suggest that if you have a discussion about risks, if you ask people who are in the room to come up with you, to brainstorm with you the model of risk prioritization, that would be even better. Because when people, in my experience, when people are presented with a framework of thought, sometimes they might reject it, saying, oh, no, but this, and they will fight with the way how you advise them to prioritize risks.
Right.
But if you ask them so okay, we've got a huge list of risks now, right? I mean, huge list of fears converted to risks. How can we reason about those risks? Invite them to start making decisions so that will reduce the resistance that they have to these changes. That's my comment on this.
That's really valuable. Getting them to be involved in how they quantify the risks is definitely, but I think it also helps maybe to go in with a suggestion and then have them pick out the suggestion or customize it to the conversation that we're having right now. But anyway, we are at the top of our recording time, and I feel like we've just scratched the surface of this topic. So I get the inkling that we'll be returning to this topic pretty soon. But it was great to have you on board, Mike. Thank you so much for your participation in this conversation. And so here's to another episode. Here's to a new year. Wish everybody wish all of you had a great start and a lovely rest of the year. And yeah, we're looking forward to return to you once again. I mean, like all the links will be included. And yeah, so here's the team BeyondQuality signing off with another episode. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, dear folks, and thank you, Mike, for coming. It was a true pleasure to be talking to you.
Thanks once again. I've enjoyed myself enormously. Let's do it again.